I came downstairs on an ordinary Tuesday and found two people tearing my kitchen out of the wall. They weren't strangers. They were my son and his wife, and the kitchen they were ripping apart, cabinet by cabinet, was the one Arthur and I built with our own hands the summer Daniel turned 6. 34 years in that house, 34 years of birthdays and burnt toast, and Arthur humming along to the radio while he fixed the cupboard door that never quite closed. All of it going into a dumpster on the driveway, and not one of them had thought to ask me. Marianne saw my face and didn't even slow down. "It was dated, Eleanor," she said. "You'll thank us." I stood there in my robe, in the wreckage of my own life, and I said nothing. That was my first mistake. It would be my last. They moved in 3 months after Arthur's funeral. To help me, they said. I was grateful. I was a woman who'd just lost the love of her life, and my boy and his wife wanted to be close. What mother says no to that? But help has a way of turning into something else when you're not watching. First it was a spare key. Then it was their furniture in my front room. Then it was Marianne rearranging my cupboards because, in her words, my system made no sense. I told myself grief was making me oversensitive, that this was just how young families were now. But somewhere between the funeral and that Tuesday morning, the two people who'd come to help me had quietly decided the house was theirs, and I was the guest. I just hadn't realized it yet. Marianne was ashamed of my home. She never said it outright, but she didn't have to. She'd apologize for it when friends came over. "Sorry about the decor. It's on our list." She'd run her hand along Arthur's bookshelves like they were something to be tolerated. She had a phrase for everything I loved: dated, tired, past its time, and then came the campaign. "We really should modernize, Eleanor. Open it all up, knock through. A proper kitchen, a proper bathroom, the kind of place you could be proud of." I was proud of it. That was the thing she never understood. Every worn step and every faded wall was a year of my marriage. I didn't want it opened up. I wanted it exactly as Arthur left it. But what I wanted had stopped being part of the conversation. There was a question they kept circling back to, and they thought they were being subtle. "How much did Arthur leave you, Eleanor?" "Never quite like that. It came dressed up." "We just want to make sure you're looked after." "We worry about you managing it all on your own." "Have you thought about what happens to the house long term?" Daniel would ask it gently. Marianne would ask it sharper, usually when she thought I was tired, and every time the real words sat right there underneath the polite ones. How much is there? How much is left? How much will be ours? I'd been married to a careful man for 40 years. I knew what it sounded like when someone was counting money that wasn't theirs to count. So I told them what I always told them, that Arthur had left me comfortable, nothing more. I never told them the truth. I caught her in my office on a Thursday. I'd come back early from the shops, and there she was, behind Arthur's desk, both drawers open, a folder of his papers spread out in front of her. She didn't jump. That was the part that chilled me. She looked up, perfectly calm, and said she was just looking for the warranty for the boiler. There was no boiler warranty in that drawer, and we both knew it. What she didn't find, what she would never find, because I'd learned long ago to keep the important things somewhere no snooping hand would reach, was the truth about what Arthur had actually left me. Not comfortable, not careful, substantial. Enough to change how a greedy person treats you overnight, which is exactly why I'd kept it to myself. She smiled and slid the drawers shut. I smiled back, and something in me went very, very cold. I'm not proud of what I almost did next. I started looking at little flats, quiet ones, a one-bedroom on the other side of town where nobody would go through my drawers or apologize for my furniture. I told myself it would be simpler, that at my age I didn't have the fight in me, and one gray afternoon I packed 2 bags, I stood them by the front door, put my coat on, and reached for my keys, ready to walk out of the home I'd lived in for 34 years, ready to let them win. I had my hand on the latch. I could hear Marianne upstairs, already talking about which wall would come down once I was gone, and I stopped. I looked down at those 2 bags by the door, packed neat as you like, and a question rose up in me that I should have asked weeks before. Why am I the one leaving? This was my house. My marriage was in these walls. My husband was in every corner of it, and I was about to creep out the front door like an apology, so 2 people who'd never earned a single brick of it could knock it down in peace. No, I didn't pick those bags up. I kicked them, hard. Sent them skidding across the hall, clothes spilling out across the floor, and I stood there breathing like I'd run a mile. The grieving woman who packed those bags was gone. In her place stood someone they'd never met, someone Arthur knew very well. They go. Not me. There was only one thing that could stop me, and they held it without even knowing. Sophie and Jack, my grandchildren, 7 and 10, and the whole of my heart. I knew exactly how it would go if I pushed back hard. Marianne would weaponize them. A canceled visit here, a forgotten birthday there, until the message was clear: behave, Eleanor, or you'll never see those children again. I couldn't bear it. Whatever else I lost, I would not lose them. So I knew, standing there in that wrecked hallway, that I couldn't fight them head on. I couldn't shout or threaten or throw them out. They'd take the children and I'd never recover. I needed something cleverer than a fight. And then I remembered what Arthur had left me. Not the money, the instructions. My husband was the gentlest man I ever met, and he understood people better than anyone I've known. He loved Daniel, but he saw him clearly. He saw the boy who'd never been told no, who drifted into Marianne's orbit and let her do his thinking for him, who'd never in his life built a single thing he hadn't been handed. And before he died, Arthur made a wish, and he wrote it down, plain and legal. There was a property, Cedar Court, a small holding at a smart gated address, part of Arthur's estate. His wish was that Daniel and Marianne should have it, on one condition: that they live there, settle there, and stand on their own 2 feet. Arthur knew. He always knew his boy would need a lesson one day. He just trusted me to be the one who taught it. I'd been holding that lesson all along. I just hadn't been ready to give it. Now I was. I knew Marianne went through my things, so this time, I let her. I left the Cedar Court paperwork where she'd be sure to find it. The deed, the address, that smart, gated postcode practically glowing on the page. I didn't say a word about it. I didn't have to. I just waited. It took her 2 days. I watched it land. I watched her go quiet and thoughtful at dinner. Watched her and Daniel start having low conversations that stopped when I walked in. A prestigious address, sitting empty, attached to the family. She couldn't think about anything else. The woman who'd called my home dated had just discovered there was a better one going spare. Her own snooping had handed her the hook. All I had to do was let her swallow it. When they finally came to me, it was Marianne who spoke. It always was. She had a whole speech ready about the renovation, the quotes, the timeline, the loan against the house. She was halfway through it when I held up my hand. "I won't be changing this house," I said. "Not the kitchen, not the walls, not 1 inch of it. It stays exactly as Arthur and I made it." Her face started to fall. "But," I said, "there's Cedar Court. It was Arthur's wish that the 2 of you have it if you'll honor his terms." I watched the disappointment turn to something hungry in about half a second. A gated address. Their own place. They didn't even ask what the terms were. People who think they're winning never read the small print. Within a month, they were gone. the house was quiet, and they left believing they'd gotten the better end of the deal. They had no idea they'd just stepped onto the bottom rung of a ladder I'd built. I'd gotten exactly what I wanted, and it nearly broke me. The house was mine again. My kitchen, half destroyed, but mine. My quiet, my drawers unsnooped, Arthur in every corner. But the silence I'd fought so hard for had a cost I hadn't counted on. No small feet on the stairs, no Sophie climbing into my lap with a book, no Jack showing me some treasure he'd found in the yard. I missed my grandchildren so much it was a physical thing, an ache that sat in my chest from morning to night. I'd won the house and lost the children, and I sat in my reclaimed home and wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But I hadn't finished. Not by a long way, because the lesson was only just beginning. Here's what Daniel and Marianne didn't understand when they raced to claim their prize. Cedar Court wasn't just a pretty address. It was 5 apartments and the cottage they'd moved into, and those apartments looked straight down over the cottage on every side. They were watched now, the way they'd once watched me. And it was a mess. Arthur had let it slide in his last years, too tired to chase it. Tenants behind on their rent. One of them hadn't paid in the better part of a year. Repairs no one had touched. A property in slow decline, bleeding a little more value every month. That smart postcode came attached to a problem they had absolutely no idea how to solve. They'd wanted the prestige. What they'd actually inherited was a job. And Arthur and I had always intended it that way. Fate, as it sometimes does, handed me my next move. The couple next door to me, a lovely modern house, everything Marianne had ever wanted and far better than that cramped cottage, announced they were emigrating to Canada. They needed a quick, clean sale, no chain, no fuss. I didn't hesitate. I'd been the gentle, grieving widow long enough. I called the agent that same afternoon, viewed it the next morning, and bought it outright. Cash. At a discount, because a cash buyer with money ready and no chain behind her commands one. And I had spent 40 years married to a man who taught me the value of being the one who can say yes on the spot. A beautiful house, right next door to me. The kind of place where 2 parents and 2 children could be very happy. And the grandchildren I missed so badly could be a 30-second walk from my front door. But I wasn't going to give it to them. They were going to earn it. I invited them over and told them about the house. I watched their eyes light up, Marianne already picturing herself in it, already redecorating in her head. And just as she opened her mouth, I said the words I'd been saving. Before you get excited, what are you going to do about Cedar Court? They stared at me, blank, thrown completely off balance because they'd never once heard that tone from me before. And I let them hear all of it. That property is in decline, I said. I want a plan, a real one. How you'll fill those apartments with long-term tenants who actually pay, how you'll deal fairly with the ones who don't, the budget, the risks, the return, the cash flow, all of it. I'll pay for a consultant to help you do it properly. But the keys to that house next door don't move until your plan is finished, and I have approved it. The grieving widow was gone. In her place sat the owner of more property and more money than either of them had ever dreamed I had. And I'd built in enough safeguards that there was no faking it. They started exactly how you'd expect, resentful, out of their depth. Marianne convinced it was a punishment, Daniel sulking through the consultant's first few meetings like a boy made to redo his homework. And then, somewhere in the middle of it, something turned. It was the cottage that did it, I think. Living in it, surrounded by those apartments on every side, they finally started to see what they were actually holding. Not a consolation prize. A property of real potential, left to slide, waiting for someone to take it in hand. Marianne stopped seeing a chore. She started seeing a chance. I'd watch her at the kitchen table, late, working through the consultant's figures, and the apologizing, complaining woman I'd known for years was just gone. In her place was someone with a purpose, someone capable, someone I'd never have guessed was in there at all. And then they did the thing I genuinely hadn't expected. They did the work, and they did it right. They served notice, properly, fairly, on the one tenant whose arrears had grown too large to recover. No cruelty in it, just a thing that had been left undone for years, finally done. And then they sat down with every other tenant in turn, face to face, and laid out the new arrangements. Honest rent, honest terms, repairs that would actually happen. The good tenants stayed. The whole place steadied under them, almost overnight. They weren't occupants anymore, mooching off a thing they hadn't built. For the first time in their lives, they were managing something, building something. It was the first honest graft either of them had ever put in. And I watched it from my window, and I thought, well, look at that, Arthur. I'll be honest with you. I set that test braced to drag them through every single step of it. I expected excuses, half measures, a flimsy thing cobbled together to get the keys and nothing more. What they put in front of me stopped me cold. A full plan, a real one. Everything Cedar Court needed, mapped out clear and sensible. Budgets down to the line, the risks named, the numbers honest. A genuine route to turn a declining property back into the valuable holding it was always meant to be. Marianne walked me through it herself, and she knew her figures. She knew them cold. I sat at my own kitchen table and read it twice, and I realized I had underestimated them. Right at the end, after everything, I'd made the same mistake they'd made about me. And do you know, out of every property I own, every pound Arthur left me, that plan on the table was the proudest I'd felt in years. I approved it. Of course I approved it. They'd earned it twice over. I handed Daniel the keys to the house next door, and I watched my son carry his children's things across to a home he could finally say he'd worked for. And just like that, the ache was gone. Sophie on my stairs again. Jack hammering on my door at all hours, treasure in his hands. The grandchildren I'd been so afraid of losing, living a 30-second walk away, in and out of my kitchen as if they'd never left. I hadn't lost them. I'd brought them home on my terms, in my time. And Marianne, the woman who'd once apologized for my house, knocked on my door one evening, sat down across from me, and asked if she could pick my brains about the second property they were thinking of taking on. Asked me. Like I was someone worth learning from. I suppose in the end, I was. People look at a quiet old woman and they think they know what they're seeing. They see weakness. They see someone soft, someone past it, someone who'll fold if you push. They never once stop to ask what 40 years beside a clever man might have taught her. What she might be holding that she's simply chosen not to show. I lost my husband. I let two people I loved walk all over me for a while. And then I remembered who I was, and I taught them the lesson my Arthur trusted me to teach. Not with cruelty, but with a test they had to rise to. And they rose. My kitchen still isn't modern. The cupboard door still doesn't quite close. I wouldn't change a thing. My name is Eleanor. My husband knew exactly how strong I was. It only took the rest of them a little longer to find out. Never underestimate the quiet woman in the corner. By the time you realize what she is, she's already won. If Eleanor's story moved you, you know what to do. Give it a like and subscribe to keep stories like this one coming.